This conference will now be recorded.
That's what I wanted to do. I got jumpy and hit it twice. I'm going to call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. It is Thursday, November 5th, 2020 at 5:32. We are meeting in a virtual format on the GoToMeeting platform. I'll call the meeting order. I will note that we do have a quorum with members Noel, Davis, Urban, DeVos, Fichtner, and Rosso in attendance virtually. First item of business would be the approval of the agenda. I do have a couple extra things to put into the reports, but would anyone move approval of the agenda?
Andy Davis would move the agenda.
Would anyone second Davis's motion?
DeVos will second.
We have a motion by Davis, second by DeVos to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Just go ahead and turn your microphone on. Hearing none, I'll just say all in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye.
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 Thank you. Agenda is approved. You have the minutes of both September 17th, 2020 and October 1, 2020 in your electronic agenda packet. Would anyone move the approval or note corrections or alterations?
This is Rosso. I will move the approval. Do you want that for both sessions or do you want them approved separately, Russ?
Will you move on both?
I certainly will. I do have a
Yeah,
comment though.
we can do both. So I'll put it down to approve both meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Andy Davis.
I got Joe Urban with a second. All in favor of the minutes as presented, say aye.
Point of
Aye.
order.
Russ,
Aye.
I thought, didn't Joe have some comment on the minutes?
Oh,
No,
I
that
thought
was
he was
me.
seconding it.
Oh, sorry. Ken,
Okay.
sorry.
Did anyone have
Yeah, no,
anything to add? Ken?
Yeah, this is Rosso. All I want to do is compliment Cindy or whomever put together the minutes. Very thorough and complete. So nicely done.
Thank you. I'll pass that along. All in favor, say aye.
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 Minutes are approved. First item of business is to consider an alley vacation that was petitioned by the Klanderud and Obermiller residences at 711 and 717th North 8th Street. There is no drivable surface. I hope maybe you had an opportunity to go by. It's full of vegetation. It's got some utility apparatus in it. It's unlikely to ever be developed as an alley. It has an excessive grade as you would leave 8th Street and travel to the east. If a surface was going to be in there, I foresee that there'd be certainly some drainage challenges, probably the installation of some intakes within the alley, which is an added expense that no one needs to make. We don't have any municipal utilities other than an electrical service line. The other private utilities would typically comment before the city council public hearing. So I sent them notice a couple weeks ago. Some of them don't comment unless they have an issue. Some will say we don't have any issue, but they all have an opportunity, and I'd expect that the others would have a chance to comment prior to the 23rd. All of the properties within the block would maintain access from the north-south alley. The vacation of this leg of that alley would be consistent with what had been done in the other surrounding blocks in that area, so it certainly is somewhat customary. The two adjoining property owners don't anticipate construction within the alley, just to clean it up and perhaps enhance the landscaping to improve the appearance of the properties. I've looked at the comprehensive plan and it's really kind of silent as to the vacation of alleys in this instance. So the best we could say is it would not be contrary to the 2016 comp plan. And there is a public hearing that is scheduled before the city council on the 23rd of November, where they will consider a recommendation that you would make tonight. I don't see Mr. Klanderud joining us tonight, but are there questions that I could answer? Shannon.
I just was curious as to the purpose of that alley there. I have no opposition to vacating it because it seems like it's probably not of much of any use at all.
Yeah, in the original plats, it wasn't uncommon to have both east, west, and north-south alleys in a block. One of them would be 20 feet wide, the other would be 16 feet wide. Really kind of an antiquated planning. You know, if you do have an alley now, it's typically one, and it would run east and west or north and south. But given the era in which these subdivisions were done, Shannon, it was quite common, and this kind of had the T alley system. So yeah, I can't explain what the benefit of encumbering that additional land for alley was. Other questions, comments? Go ahead and turn your microphone on. I think we can manage this. Hearing none, there is a resolution that's been prepared for your consideration that would recommend that the city council provide for the vacation of the alley as petitioned by the adjoining property owners. Would anyone be inclined to move the resolution?
This is Rosso, and I will so move.
Thank you, Ken. We have a motion by Rosso. Is there a second?
This is Fickner. I'll second it.
I'm going to go with Scott Fickner just so I can get him into the stat sheet here, if you will, the box score. Any further discussion? Just go ahead and turn on your microphone.
This is Rosso.
Hearing
I
none.
drove past it. I drove past it today, and then also came down the alley, the north-south alley. And as you indicated, Russ, to put an alley in there with the slope and the location and everything else in the way would be highly unlikely and certainly very cumbersome. And if they do plan to do some enhancements for the landscaping or whatever, it would certainly improve it. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Ken. Any other comments? If not, I will call the roll call. Again, motion to recommend the prepared resolution. Member Davis.
Aye.
Member DeVos.
Aye.
Member Noel.
Aye.
Member Fickner.
Aye.
Member Urban.
Aye.
Member Rosso.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Motion carried. The city council, as they discussed the Brad Baker proposed amendment to the gateway ordinance, they discussed it at workshop on the council level, and they've kind of kicked it back to you. No real clear consensus at the council level. Some expressed that they appreciate the district as it is. Some had suggested that perhaps some alterations could be made. And so I talked to the city administrator, and I'm kind of going to give you a continuum from do nothing to taking it out of the district entirely. So the reason I included do nothing is because it's beaten into you as a planner that in every single instance, that's your first option. So we look at the do nothing scenario, and we all understand that that maintains the enhanced facade on all four, regardless of the location of the property within the district. It was suggested that perhaps a two-tiered gateway overlay would be appropriate, with one set of standards applied for the properties between Old Minnesota, pardon me, between Old Minnesota and Highway 169. That would have the higher level of standards, and then perhaps a second tier that would be the properties on the west side of Old Minnesota. So those abutting Hallett's Pond, this property, the industrial site, well, somewhat of an industrial, it's zoned commercial, where Bob Volk has his properties, and Ties Automotive, I believe Service Master used to be back there. Cliff Isley used to have his car repair there. So the thought was that perhaps the properties between Old Minnesota and Highway 169 would maintain the current gateway standards, and then Mr. Baker's proposal only on the facades exposed to a street or a park would apply to the properties on the west side of Old Minnesota Avenue. Another two-tiered system had been suggested by the mayor, and I don't even know if he mentioned this at the workshop, but he certainly came in and address some things with me. But right now, the gateway limits the application of that steel, aluminum, or vinyl siding to 25% of the facade. The mayor thought perhaps in the lower level tier but that could be up to 75% metal and steel and kind of flip-flop it. An application that would be similar to that might be the Autotronics across or by Arby's there, where it's got about 40 inches of brickwork, and then it's all what I'd call the metal of a Morton building or Lindsay building. But the mayor thought perhaps that would be an acceptable standard on the west side of Old Minnesota. The other option would be Mr. Baker's proposal that you did originally recommend to the council. And I typically don't bring things that you recommend back to the council for a workshop, but given that it was a 5-2 vote and the 2 votes no were the council members, I kind of wanted to have some bigger discussion, so we had kind of had a little more direction. So we did take it to the full council and mayor. Brad and Shannon had opportunities to comment. But then Mr. Baker's proposed amendment to again only require that enhanced facade on walls that would expose to a city street or park. Another option would be to remove those properties on 3rd Street. So that would be the Hallett's Pond site that, per previous multifamily had been proposed. That would be that Ties Automotive on the west side of 3rd Street. It would be the Baker site. It would be the back half on the west side of the alley of the Cambria site, and it would be the Partners for Affordable Housing homeless shelter in the former St. Peter Motel. It could be any combination of those. So you could remove Baker's property and those other 3 and then still adopt a 2-tiered that would apply to the remaining properties on Old Minnesota that actually front the highway. So to kind of keep and the nuclear action would be to eliminate the gateway entirely and not have any gateway district at all. The submittals that I sent you, when you look at the maps on page 21, that's the north gateway area. That's that blue area with the crosshatch on it. Page 22 is the south gateway. And I believe I tried to maintain the same scale of those. So you can see the south gateway is considerably smaller and not as linear. Page 23 then shows those 2 gateways in relation to each other. And then page 24 and 25, that is a photo of the Baker property, looking north, south, east, and west. The first page, the one on the right-hand side with the 2 trees, that's actually from the east curb line of Old Minnesota. So that's looking across Old Minnesota and getting the back end of that property. You can see the 2 buildings that Logger owns with the tax service and the auto detailing there. Page 26 shows a couple of the developments that have been undertaken under the gateway in St. Peter. 28, should have had a bigger picture, but that kind of compares a quick trip that meets the gateway to a quick trip that they typically build. And that's the quick trip on the right-hand side. That's the one in Mankato on the north end of 169 by McDonald's and Hardee's. Pending gateway developments would include the Mediacom property if Dollar General were to be redeveloped. And then I show a couple, and again, the picture should have been bigger, some bad gateway examples. And I'll buy someone a cup of coffee if they can tell me what town that is. I had their name on there, and Todd told me to take their name off. So,
Russ, it's got to be Fairmont, right?
It's Owatonna as you come in on Highway 14. So
No,
I had
Fairmont's
to
your hometown.
Yeah.
If Fairmont's your hometown, I had to mention it.
Well, Ken, you know the mighty Fairmont Cardinals are in town tonight.
Yes, you're right. You're
But
absolutely
I don't
right.
think I can go. I'm not family. So I'm going to open it up and you can comment if you think that your original recommendation for the Baker amendment was correct, that's fine. But if you think perhaps a 2-tiered, or if you have any other ideas that even weren't mentioned, and I'm going to start with the chairman. So Mr. Davis.
There's a lot of options, and I think sometimes it's healthy just to start somewhere. I think a 2-tier system makes sense. I think the idea that things along Highway 169 look nice for people driving through town, but I think we also should maintain some standards for businesses, along Old Minnesota. But perhaps they don't need to be this as extensive. I don't have an opinion between the 2 tiers yet, but that makes sense. And I think that would achieve our goal. So that's where I'm leaning so far.
Okay. Mr. DeVos?
So I'd say, my biggest concern, quite honestly, is the stuff east of Old Minnesota. And from what I got from the council, and Shannon can confirm whether this was an accurate description, is there's a lot of hesitation. Essentially, my opinion is there's a lot of hesitation in changing the ordinance east of it because 169 is so visible. But I have I'm an advocate of the two-tier system though, and I'm interested in in finding flexibility for that, for the stuff that's essentially west of Old Minnesota Avenue, particularly the 3rd Street properties. I think there's when I read the ordinance, what was the original? Let me find the verbiage on the original ordinance. Let's see. Oh shoot, I gotta rotate view counterclockwise. It's intended to promote high quality development within the Highway 169 corridor. The design features are intended to create a memorable and positive first impression upon those entering the city, particularly the motoring public. So when I read that, I mean, it really does emphasize what we want the community to look like along 169. I do understand the wanting stuff beyond that, particularly around Hy-Vee and such, to have some standards, but I do think there's room for flexibility essentially on those standards once you get to west of Old Minnesota. So I could go with the facades, street facing facades, or perhaps the mayor's 75% vinyl is acceptable. So I am flexible that way, but I definitely, and I feel the council isn't interested in really adjusting the ordinance for what's right along 169. So.
Very good. Thank you, Brad. Shannon?
I would agree with Brad's assessment. I don't think there's any appetite in the council to change the ordinance overall, but either a two-tiered system or one thing we haven't talked about is changing that list of how many is on the list of the approved finishes, because there was also some discussion about building materials have changed, some materials have become more attractive with time, so that would be another option that I think would be doable. The more I've thought about it, do feel like there should be some standard for that area, because all the traffic that comes off of 169 into DQ, I mean, there is a fair amount of traffic there. And so I think I do overall favor keeping that visible area with some standard.
Thank you. Who's on my list? Mr. Fichtner?
Yeah, I took a look at this and, we talked about a lot of different options last time, but when I read the packet on the two-tier, I really started to think about that, and I really liked that, because if you look to me at the one at the Gateway Overlay District in the south and the north, there is right around Minnesota, and I think that's what it was intended for originally. But it's nice, like Shannon just said, to have a second tier of requirements for that east of Old Minnesota or west of Old Minnesota, and keep everything else the same as it is. And I do like, as opposed to changing the facades, I like the makeup of the language, that if it's up against a park or a roadway, those would be required to have the overlay requirements. But if it was the back or the side, then it would not. So I guess I would like to see the two-tier with everything west of Old Minnesota being a different tier.
Very good. Scott? Mr. Urban?
My opinion reflects Andy's a little bit and Scott's both. I don't necessarily want to see a lot of change to that, because I feel like then it becomes a much more murky when you start changing the rules based on the property. I think to have standards fits better. But at the same time, I didn't like the idea of having to see the bakers put a facade all the way around that building, because if someone would have built just east of them, that would have been covered. It made more sense to me to show the street sides have the nicer looking. I mean, just how I view it. But I think a two-tier system is kind of a nice compromise, especially like west of Old Minnesota there, because it is far enough, I feel, off the highway that it doesn't, you're not really going to see things from Minnesota or from 169. So.
Thank you, Joe. Mr. Rosso.
Thanks, Russ. Couple of things. One of the first things that always enters my mind on this type of a proposal is it would be a significant asset to the community. And I don't think we should purposefully, and that's not the intent of the discussion, but would make it more cumbersome, more expensive, and less likely it would happen. And the private financing of this makes it all more attractive. I can certainly understand the purpose of the Gateway District, but I really think that should probably be directed more literally, as it says in the language, if I'm not mistaken, to the 169 corridor. And I drove past there after our prior meeting, from 169 and also down Old Minnesota, did the same thing today, as well as coming down 3rd. And really there's in my opinion anyway, there's relatively limited visibility of that west side of that block from 169. There is obviously from Old Minnesota, but if you look at page 20, there's a distinct possibility. Maybe Joe mentioned that earlier. There's probably a fairly good likelihood that there'll be a building at some point adjacent to the Baker property to the east. And then also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the proposed field house would be on the south side of the Baker property. So eventually there could easily be a building to the south side, which would be across the street from Hy-Vee and would have much more exposure, which means that if the Bakers are asked now to have an exterior finish on both the east side and south side, north side, that may eventually be not exposed to any type of roadway or park or whatever, that would leave only the west side. And of course, that's a long ways from 169. Also, the other buildings in that area tend to be, as you indicated earlier, commercial or industrial and by and large warehouse type buildings. And they're not, they're functional, but they're not necessarily aesthetically beautiful. But I think there's room for compromise, and I really question, and I think maybe Brad, you mentioned at the prior meeting that, and I can't speak for you, but I indicating that maybe to the west of Old Minnesota really wasn't necessarily a critical point of the overlay district.
Thank you,
And
Ken.
that's, yep, thank you.
Did you have more?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, from that go around, there seems to be some support for a two-tiered system. So if we talk about a two-tiered, then would it propose perhaps be two-tiered again with Old Minnesota to Highway 169 with the current regulations, and then the second tier west of Old Minnesota with the Baker Amendment recommendations only exposed to a facade or a park? Andy?
Russ, go ahead.
Well, no, we can do it this way. Shannon, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I liked the point that Joe made about sort of keeping rules consistent and how just for the person coming in trying to interpret them, both yourself and staff, as well as people who may be building. So I would favor keeping the rules as they are, but then also having the two sides or the street facing sides part of it. So
clarify that. So the lower level of tier would only be on a street facade?
Street or park, I think,
Okay.
is what had
So
been
that would-
suggested.
So that would be to implement the Baker Amendment as the tier 2, the lower tier, only on
Yes.
facades exposed to a park or a street. And
Yeah,
as Ken talked, the Bakers, their site or their field house is pushed to the south of that property, and their intent is that it's south enough that at some point, if they wanted, they could subdivide that and have a saleable lot on the north side of that lot that meets all of the minimum requirements. But they have not expressed any absolute that that's going to happen. So, Mr. DeVos, you had a comment?
Well, Ken is right. I did, overall, I do question the need for involving in the overlay district the properties that are along the north-south route of North 3rd Street. But basically in an effort to compromise, I do think probably the best option would be a tier 2 system that matches the Baker Amendment. So basically tier 1 is east of Old Minnesota, and then tier 2 would be west of Old Minnesota, which would essentially mirror the Baker Amendment. I do question whether we do need to go along the north-south route of North 3rd Street. But I like I said, this is a compromise. The Bakers were willing to build on that property with that amendment. So I would think that'd be a fair way to go. So.
Yeah, I should mention for the commission members that aren't on the council, at the workshop, the mayor asked that I ask Mr. Baker to quantify the dollar amount that it would cost him to abide by the full gateway. And Jesse Lager, his contractor, said it would add $28,000 to the cost. And a privately financed field house, that is significant. And I do agree with Ken that we certainly don't want to be prohibitive where we don't become the alternative, or we're not an alternative or a choice, and they bypass us. A field house I think could likely be built in Kasota with very few regs. Anyone else have? Scott, did you have something to say? Or I thought.
No, I agree. The two-tier system with the Baker Amendment for the second tier, I like that option.
Okay. Andy?
Can I make a motion?
Yeah.
I move that we adopt a 2-tier system with the second tier using the Baker Amendment, and that the dividing line be Old Minnesota Avenue.
Everybody understand the motion? It would be to impose the Baker Amendment on the tier that would be west of Old Minnesota, and to keep the current regulations on the tier 1, which would be east of Old Minnesota. Would anyone be inclined to second Andy's motion?
Brad DeVos will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Now it would be appropriate for us to have some discussion on that, and I will start with Member DeVos.
I have nothing further to add. I think it's a good compromise to follow.
Okay, Ms. Noel?
Nothing really further to add. I think that the Bakers will be happy with this.
Sure. Scott?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add really, but I do think that the south side is all centered around Minnesota, Old Minnesota. So this will center the north side on Old Minnesota, or on Minnesota Avenue 169. And I think that that's fair to pull them out and make it a separate option.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Scott. Mr. Urban?
I got nothing to add. I think it's all been covered pretty well at this point.
Okay, Ken?
Please clarify with the proposed Baker Amendment, which sides of the building would be required to have the enhanced?
Yeah, the Baker Amendment would lessen the restrictions and only require that enhanced facade on a wall that is exposed to a city street, not a city street, a street or a park. So I would include
I understand
highways.
that.
Yeah.
But tell me which sides, in your opinion, or in the council's opinion, face the street.
On Mr. Baker's, it would be the north and the west. The north would face 3rd Street between them and Shopko, and the west would face between 3rd Street and the residential properties on the west side of 3rd. That's how
And
I
the west,
interpret it.
okay, the west, I totally understand. The north, I question, as you indicated earlier, and I guess I had mentioned that also, the probability, or at least the likelihood, of another structure going in there at some point in time. And that's a significant cost that at that point would not be exposed to a street. Other than that, I think the 2-tier is a relatively practical solution.
Yeah, if Mr. Baker were to propose the subdivision of that property at this point, then I would interpret it that he'd only have to have that enhanced facade on the west side of his building. But given that it's one property now, and I would even make that ruling on one side if he was to initiate the subdivision of that, or an administrative lot split. It's a pretty simple process. And he could still own both. And then, market the other one at such time if he would ever decide to do that. So I might mention that to Brad as a way to even reduce his cost more.
Exactly. Yeah. If you wouldn't mind making him cognizant of that as a potential, I appreciate that.
I will make sure I do that. I promised him I'd call him tomorrow. Mr. Urban.
Is there, right now, they have no plan to develop that north side of that lot. They're not going to use it for parking or anything. It's going to stay an empty lot.
They just started looking to keep it empty, and they want to make sure it's big enough to meet the minimum size, and that it can be developed to meet all of the regulations as to setbacks and parking and everything else that it would be. But who knows what it ever would be.
So just hypothetically speaking, if they were to subdivide it right now, so they wouldn't have to improve that north side of the building, what if they do then decide to put that north, make it a parking lot in the future? Would they then be required to enhance that north side of that building?
I'd have to look at that, but I think if it was just a parking lot, so commercial or off-street parking, that wouldn't be on the same site as the principal use, which would be the field house.
Okay.
And I believe it's a conditional use. It would be like someone putting up a park and ride or a paid parking lot. And I believe that's a conditional use, and perhaps it could be addressed at that time to have the enhanced facade put on that. Yeah, I
want to just try to cover some of those a little. I mean, we can do what ifs all night, I know, but I don't want to limit, business, but at the same time, we want to make it look appealing though to a degree.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Any other comments? Ken, I can't see you waving, so you just got to speak up.
No, I appreciate the discussion.
Okay.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Well, seeing no one, I am going to call the roll call. And in this instance, I will start with Member Noel.
Aye.
Member Fichtner.
Aye.
Member Urban.
Aye.
Member Rosso.
Aye.
Member Davis.
Aye.
Member DeVos.
Aye.
All right. So I will put that, you're going to have to act on that again at the next meeting after I write it into an ordinance form and then formally recommend it to the council again. And then we'll have to set up a council hearing. But I'm confident that we can get this done by early February. And then Mr. Baker can get all geared up for spring construction. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't have the discussion about removing those properties fronting 3rd Street, both on the west side and the east side, completely from the gateway. And because I know it's come up in our discussion here and I forgot where I left off, so I'm going to start with Mr. Urban to discuss that matter.
What, can you clarify the question for the discussion, please?
Yeah, to actually completely remove these properties from the gateway. So they wouldn't have a restriction. They could be developed, like a Family Dollar. I think that would be unique, but, and again, it would be that Hallett's Pond property. Well, I think the Hallett's Pond property, that's actually more likely to be developed for residential purposes. But it would be that property, again, where Ties Automotive is on the west side in that tin building, the Baker property, the back half of Cambria, and then the partner for affordable housing. So those would be the 3rd Street and I just
Where
wanted
there's
to
already
make sure.
mixed residential and commercial the way it is right there.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't really have a strong opinion one way or another right now. I haven't developed one at this point.
Okay.
It's such an odd little area right there.
Very well. Ken.
Just a couple of quick thoughts. I think certainly the west side of Old Minnesota certainly should be held to a lower threshold or lower bar, if you will, than the exact corridor 169. Although, and no disrespect to any properties or property owners along 169, but there's some significant appearance issues on some of those structures that anybody that drives along there is obviously going to be well aware of. So I'm a whole lot less concerned about Old Minnesota, particularly the west side, than the 169 corridor. So and again, I keep coming back to balancing the intent of the gateway, which I'm largely supportive of, but also balancing that, as I mentioned, with the development and the interest in developers improving that area and upgrading the not only the tax base in St. Peter, but the utilization of that property. So we need you repeat the word for the third time, a balance, in my opinion.
I'm writing that in the minutes, Ken, so it's going to say Rosso suggested we need a good balance. So thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a well thought out or strong opinion about this. I mean, I think so. I guess I think things are fine the way they are. Let's persuade otherwise.
Okay, very good. Brad?
I do think those properties on the east and west side of North 3rd Street, so we're talking the north-south run of the street, I think there is a visibility issue that I think I'd like to see addressed, but there doesn't seem to be an appetite to address it. And everybody's got their own opinion. But I do think from a development perspective, it could potentially hinder some development in the early stages for people who might have another use for it. Those are just my thoughts. And it is only that, quite honestly, it's only that section there, basically, that it is on the north-south run. Obviously, you've got your Union Street, you got your exposure on Union Street for some of the properties there that you'd want the Union Street actually covered. So, but the stuff running along the west side, the east and west side of North 3rd Street, I think there's an opportunity for flexibility there, I think, just from a visibility perspective.
Thank you. Shannon?
At this time, I don't think I would favor removing it entirely from the Gateway District, only because I feel pretty positive about the two-tier system. That is going to be a highly visible location, I think, just because of Hy-Vee and the amount of visitors that come through that area because of Hy-Vee. And I think maybe in the short term, increased expense could turn some people off to developing in that area, but I think as that area is improved, it will only be more desirable as a location. And I think people will like the feeling of being in an area that feels well thought out and high quality. So those are my initial thoughts.
Okay. Mr. Fichtner?
Yeah, I think there is some logic to leaving it as we've proposed it. One of the things is to have an ordinance that splits along a boundary line in the back of lots, I think is a little harder to visualize than it is when it's on the roadway side.
Very well. Well, there doesn't seem to be support for removing, so we won't broach that with the council, and I won't prepare an ordinance that would accomplish that at your next meeting. I think we've got direction. Is there anything anyone else wants to add on the discussion regarding the Baker amendment?
Russ, this may not be germane, certainly not to the Baker Amendment, but just a somewhat adjunct thought here. Is there any interest or potential with the city becoming somehow involved to enhance the appearance of some of the properties that do front 169?
We've never had that conversation that I'm aware of. As far as, providing low interest or 0% loans or things like we do in the downtown area. But you've got two council people on here, and they can bring that up on a workshop, and we'll have a goal session coming up at the end of November, I think it is. So yeah, Ken, I would, if you feel strongly, I'd suggest you talk to Shannon and Brad as their liaison to the council. What do others think of that?
Well, I'll
Shannon.
just reply. I'll respond directly to Ken, and I think that is definitely worth discussing. And so I'm going to put it on a Post-it note and send it to Todd.
There you go. Constituent services.
Thank you.
Anyone
I appreciate
else?
that.
I think that's a good idea to look at that. I drove, like Ken talked about, I drove the area and everything before. And I think it would be a positive thing to look at that as an option.
Very good. Anyone else? Sorry, Joe.
Do I recall, wasn't McDonald's supposed to have to do a refresh or a rebuild of their building there? I thought we had talked about that a while ago.
Likely coming up this year, Joe.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then the property where Lake Washington Marine was at, that's been sold from my understanding, correct?
Hy-Vee has purchased that.
That's what I thought. Okay, so we will see some redevelopment there.
Yeah, just a minute, I'm scribbling a note here. So, yeah, McDonald's is a corporately owned real estate, and then it has an owner-operator franchisee. So just like they did with the Fairmont one a couple years ago, the corporate's going to tear it down to the ground and rebuild it. The Fairmont was about a 4-month process. The employees had opportunity to work in Wyndham, which is 45 miles away, or Blue Earth, which is about 20 miles away. So the same franchisee owns those. I don't know. I think the St. Peter employees will have an opportunity to get some hours in Mankato if they choose. But I don't know if anyone has kids in sports that's been down to Fairmont or anything, but it's pretty contemporary looking building. So it'll be a substantial change. I believe they're going to orient the building further south on that lot where they have the truck parking. And we're trying to figure out how to pull the trigger on the roundabout there at Old Minnesota and St. Julian. When we acquired that land, the plan was to use the tax increment from Shopko. But the McDonald's and the other developments didn't materialize at the proper pace. And so we cannot use tax increment from Shopko to pay for that roundabout. You have to have incurred the debt within 5 years of establishing the district. And obviously Shopko's been there more than 5. I'm going to have some conversations with the city administrator with some of those other developments on Old Minnesota that are pending. Quick Trip, Hy-Vee. Perhaps it would be wise to maybe consider an additional tax increment district to try to grab some of those value-added taxes to help pay for those improvements that are mandated by that type of a development. So, but we continue to have a plan to construct a roundabout at that. We just had a meeting with staff about our state aids and other municipal aids and what we have available for financing. So the needs continue to grow, the financing perhaps not as much. So. But yeah, and then Hy-Vee again, the convenience store on the very north end at the former Ford and Anytime Fitness site. So just got a very few title issues that we're trying to clean up because it's combining a bunch of lots. And there were some things done when Ford was built that I can't explain. So working with the city attorney to try to get that cleaned up. So any other comments or questions?
Russ, this is Rosso again. Does Hy-Vee have plans for the old Lake Washington Marine site?
Yeah, C-store and perhaps a liquor store.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yep, I'm just glad to hopefully get it cleaned up.
It would be an improvement.
Yep, yes, it will be, yes. Anything else before I go on to my reports? Okay, please intend to assemble on the first Thursday night in December. We will be reviewing a preliminary and final plat for Windsor Pond subdivision number 4. Pardon me. Mr. Bulk only has about 3 lots in inventory. So he wants to get another, I think this plat will be 14 lots. And it'll get us almost all the way down to Traverse. It'll get us to Victoria, which is the cross street in there. So then I think he'd have a 5th phase, and that should be about it for that development. So I'll prepare the development agreement. He'll have parkland dedication. He'll have future stormwater assessment and things like that. But starting to roll in. It's not time sensitive, obviously. If it doesn't happen until January, it doesn't happen until January. Lake Washington Marine, he's given up, and that meeting is still pending with the city attorney and Mr. Tanis and Dirks and Mr. Prafke. Now I've been asked to attend when it is held, but yeah, we're probably going to pursue getting him out of the right of way. For the longest time, he was so in compliance, and it seemed like the only thing he had to do was get a fence up. But now, as his storage vehicles have started to come in, it's horrendous. And Mr. Prafke and I talked about it today, and I encouraged them to expedite getting that meeting scheduled so we can get some action. There may be some things we can do in the interim to get him out of the right of way, which again doesn't even have to be part of his conditional use. That's just a regular city ordinance. So we may pursue action on that. There's also an issue that the building official is attempting to address on building code on the interior of the building. So we'll let Mr. Bussey take his course of action with the city attorney on those matters also. But yeah, I almost feel like I should go door to door and apologize to neighbors because it certainly has gotten away from him. The other difficulty is, and I mentioned it when the Board of Zoning Appeals, and I'm pretty sure I probably mentioned it to you when you were looking at the conditional uses. The conditions can only apply to the conditional use, which is auto sales. So the storage and the repair are not conditional uses. So appropriately, there shouldn't be any conditions placed upon those uses. So that's where we kind of get, because he says, well, that car's not for sale. I don't have to have it in row and aisle. That car isn't for sale. It's stored. I don't have to do this or that. We're trying to work with Mr. Dirks, and I know Mr. Dirks wants to be good to the neighbors, and he's probably having as much difficulty as we are. So we'll try to address that. And the other issue is on the 66 unit apartment. It had been pulled from the last 2 council agendas. We're trying to address some title issues again, which you don't want to make a commitment for a $7.5 million apartment if I can't get a sewer line to it. We're trying to address some title issues. When the covenants were recorded for the first part of Traverse Green, they were erroneously filed by the county against the outlots and the multifamily lots, and they were only intended to be filed against the single family lots. And in their defense, there probably was some ambiguity in wording in the resolution I prepared. So they are taking a corrective action to remove those covenants, because one of the covenants is you can't further subdivide the property. And that's the whole intent of an outlot, is that you plan to subdivide it in the future. So it was an obvious error, misunderstanding. And again, in the recorder's defense, they usually operate with a staff of 5, and I think they're operating with 2 now because of retirements and illness. They're training in a couple of people, which, frankly, are not of very much help until they're fully trained in, because you can't have them, go out there and just do recording. It's a very detailed and special process that I couldn't even begin to understand. I joke with them because if you give them something that's not in a recordable form, they send it back with this page, and I tell them I should be able to wallpaper my office at some point. So it's not uncommon that we've got to go back and forth a couple times to get something properly recorded. But we're getting that cleaned up. It is right now on the council's agenda for Monday. If we can't get that action taken prior to that, it likely gets pulled for another 2-week period, and then it becomes certainly a springtime construction. So the developer is hanging in with us. And you know, I don't know if Ken's was with the bank. He probably knows often it's the title issues that slow something down. Because again, you want that cleared up before you make a $7.5 million investment. The other issue is we're attempting to negotiate sewer easements with Bonnie Ann's interest and the Bell Pell, I keep saying Bell Pell, Ben Pell interest. I've also called him Bell Penn, so Ben Pell, his interest, and it is going slower than we anticipated. If we're not able to negotiate the easements, we're likely going to have to recommend the council take some more adversarial actions, which I don't think either of the property owners would want, perhaps including annexation and then condemnation of an easement. But we have a limited number of families that are dictating the pace of our development. And while we fully respect private property rights, the state does give us an opportunity to get that sewer in there through some means. And so again, the developer is making a $7.5 million commitment to build an apartment complex. The city is making a commitment to get a sewer line to him. And so we will, if the council enters into that agreement, which I fully expect they will, we will be obligated to have a sewer line. And so that probably means any means necessary. Any questions? That's really all I had to report tonight.
Russ, this is Ken again.
Yeah.
A meeting or two ago, you mentioned that we're waiting for approval from the judge for the demolition of the old bowling alley. Did that
Oh, yes.
material?
Yeah, we were in front of Judge Kriebel on the 12th, and with a request for her to authorize us to do the demo as again, according to statute. And certainly the property owner's not going to clean it up. The bank's not going to clean it up. So it probably is the appropriate role for the city. It's likely going to approach $60,000 of cleanup because, you know, there was no lead paint analysis. There was no asbestos analysis. There was a fire. So almost everything needs to go to a demo landfill. Plus the block, if it was treated with a certain chemical, that needs to go to a demo landfill, and that hasn't been determined and won't until they begin demo. So Mr. Prafke said he talked to Judge Kriebel's staff today, and they're expecting something in the near future. But we've already got the bids. We've already accepted the bids. The contractors agreed to hold the bid. And if the judge told us tomorrow at 10, I wouldn't doubt that they might try to get in there by tomorrow afternoon because we really want to take care of it. For the neighbor's sake. You know, it's been October, or it's November for gosh sakes, and the fire was the 16th of February. And again, there's perhaps asbestos and some lead paint in the debris. And when they have times of heavy winds, it gets kicked up and dust perhaps enters people's homes and things like that. So following demolition, then if we do spend $60,000, there would be a $60,000 assessment against the property that would need to be paid before the property could change hands. My forecast of that would be that the property would sit empty until it went through the tax forfeiture process. And then the city could get it from the county and get ownership like we did with Welco West. Mr. Prafke and I are likely going to recommend that property be rezoned to R2 to match the Bernie McGuire property to the west and the rest of the 4th and 3rd Street area because it doesn't have the appropriate commercial access. People have to come into the residential neighborhood to access the commercial property, and certainly there will not be an access provided off of 99 given the slope and that it's just because it's a state highway. So does that answer your question, Ken?
It certainly does. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait. I know the neighbors can't either. So I'm hoping maybe by the end of this week. Any other questions? I don't see anyone waving. Would anyone move adjournment?
Andy Davis would move adjournment.
Andy Davis moves. Joe?
Urban second.
Joe Urban second. No discussion on a motion to adjourn. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Anyone dare to be opposed? I think I'm gonna go drive by the football field. Thank you
Well, you
all.
know, we've got an unlimited time. Maybe we should keep going. No, just kidding.
Yeah.